The board will now come to order. Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Alderwoman Tyus. Alderwoman Middlebrook. Alderman Bosley. Alderman Moore. Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderwoman Ingrassia. Alderman Kotar. Alderwoman Rice. Alderman Gunther. Alderman Vollmer. Alderwoman Martin. Alderman Ornowitz. Alderwoman Murphy. Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Green. Alderman Oldenburg. Alderman Rhodey. Alderman Todd. Alderwoman Davis. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Muhammad. Alderman Boyd. Alderman Vaccaro. Alderman Narayan. Alderman Cone. Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. Alderwoman Boyd. Alderwoman Navarro. President Reed.
Here.
Alderman Bosley. Alderwoman Hubbard. Alderwoman Ingrassia. Alderman Vollmer. Alderwoman Martin. Alderwoman Howard. Alderwoman Green. Alderman Rhodey. Alderwoman Davis. Alderwoman Spencer. Alderman Muhammad. 20 present.
A quorum being present, we will be led today in prayer by Pastor John Watson Jr. of Maple Temple. But before we begin prayer today, we're going to hear from our friend and Alderman Larry Arnowitz from the 12th Ward.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. First of all, I wanted to make sure I showed up today so my picture didn't appear on any milk cartons. Secondly, I felt that I had to thank everybody here for stopping by, and paying their respects during our time of difficulty. It's hard to lose anyone in your family, but a child makes it that much worse. So again, I want to thank you for everything. I appreciate it.
That was beautiful. I have 4 kids. I can't imagine, but let's give Alderman Arnowitz a big round of applause.
While you're standing. Well, thanks be unto God, who always causes us to triumph in Christ. I quoted from the Holy Scripture. Gracious God, Heavenly Father, in this season of Thanksgiving, we pause and reflect on all the challenges we have faced as a community and a city. Praise and thanksgiving enter our hearts and our minds, knowing that following your direction and guidance has led us down the path of victory. As we continue to march forward, guide the feet of our city officials who are at the front of the line, as we continue to triumph over injustice, inequality, division, and intolerance, so that all residents can experience a brighter future. Into your arms we commit ourselves, our family, our community. Amen.
We dispense with our regular order of business, take up our courtesy resolutions calendar. Alderman from the 19th. Alderman from the 22nd, would you like to make a motion to adopt our courtesy resolutions calendar?
Good morning, Mr. President, members of the board. I move to adopt the courtesy resolution calendar.
Moved by Alderman from the 22nd, seconded by Alderman from the 10th, that we adopt our courtesy resolutions calendar. Alderman from the 12th, would you like to approach the dais?
Yeah, Marl, Kathy, come on, you can all come up. Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. Today we have Marlene Cento is retiring. She has 48 years with the city of St. Louis. I've known Marlene probably 30 plus years. So I'm going to read this resolution, and as Marlene knows, this will be part of the records in City Hall. But I wish, we're limited at what we can do with the city, but I just want her to be recognized. So bear with me. Whereas in October 1971, Marlene began her long and distinguished career as a St. Louis City employee with the Department of Public Safety / Building Maintenance Section. In April of 1980, the Building Maintenance Department came to the Board of Public Service. And whereas in February 1995, Marlene was promoted to Lambert Airport as an account clerk 2, and her position was reallocated to accountant 2 in January 2000. And whereas Marlene has continued in the position of accountant 2 to this day, and whereas Ms. Cento also attended Fontbonne University, where she earned a degree in business administration. And whereas while working her full-time position, Marlene also volunteered for 20 years with Step Up St. Louis and served on their board for 8 of those years. And whereas in her spare time, Marlene raised parrots and was a family caregiver. Whereas Marlene Cento will retire from the city of St. Louis after 48 years of service on December 1st, 2019, when she will enjoy travel and time with many friends she has made throughout the career. Now therefore it be resolved by this Board of Aldermen, the City of St. Louis, that we pause in our deliberations to recognize and congratulate Marlene Cento for her many years of service and contribution to our community. We further direct the clerk of this board to spread a copy of this resolution across the minutes of these proceedings and to prepare a commemorative copy for presentation to our honoree at a time and place deemed appropriate by the sponsor. Introduced this 22nd day of November 2019 by the Honorable Larry Arnowitz, Alderman Ward 12. And I just want to thank you. I did a little better this time. But Marlene, I've known Marlene for 30 plus years. She's always been around City Hall. Always came to work, and she always tried to go above and beyond. And she stuck it out for 48 years, which is you don't see many city employees working that many years. So she was a very dedicated person, and I enjoy representing her in Ward 12 as her alderman. Thank you.
Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Any further discussion? Marlene, I also just want to thank you on behalf of city residents and people who aren't here to thank you personally for your many years of dedicated service to the city of St. Louis. Oftentimes, the people who work for the city of St. Louis, you are the first and sometimes the only contact the public ever has with the city. So your job is a big one because they carry away from that engagement their impressions of the city and the jobs, then our effectiveness in serving them. So I thank you for that. And 40 plus years, that's a long time to spend with any one organization, so that is commendable. I've worked with the city for a while, but nowhere near 40 plus years, so I can imagine that was a tough thing, but I am so thankful on behalf of my family and friends and the rest of the members of the Board of Aldermen. Congratulations on a job well done. This resolution is the highest honor the board has to give any organization or individual, and it's an official act of the board. Unlike certain things that can be written about you, the only way to change this is by an official act of the Board of Aldermen after we adopt it here today. And only 28 members, plus myself, can introduce that action. But what it does is cements in time some of your many contributions up until this point. So 100, 200 years from now, when your descendants want to know what you've done and they want to know something about you, they will be able to research the records of the city of St. Louis and know that you made a significant enough contribution that we paused on this day to recognize you. Let's give her a big round of applause and congratulations on the job well done.
It's been a great privilege to work for the city of St. Louis. Of my 48 years, I spent 24 in City Hall and I spent 24 out at the airport. And they were all good years. And to the young people today, I say coming in, you need to listen, learn, and invest. Work hard. It'll pay off. Thank you. Okay. I have with me Kathy Spencer. She's a co-worker from the airport. Patty Callahan. She's one of my very best friends. She's a manager over at the Civil Courts building. And my gentleman friend, Glenn Schaefer.
Thank you so much. I think we're going to line up on this side for some photos real quick.
Okay.
Everybody, come on over.
I know I'm always the one in front.
Let's give Marlene and her guests one more big round of applause as they exit the chambers, and thank you. It's been moved and seconded that we adopt our courtesy resolutions calendar. All in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Opposed, motion carries. With that, we'll return to our regular order of business. Introduction of honored guests. Any introduction of honored guests? Alderman from 22nd.
Mr. President, members of the board, I want to have today my honored guest, Mr. Noah Gonzalez, who will soon be the former legislative liaison to the Board of Aldermen from the mayor's office. He's moving on to greener pastures.
I'm hearing talk that he's going to be doing something with the Biden administration. Is that true? He's going to work for Joe Biden. That's a good thing. Congratulations. Alderwoman from the 1st.
Mr. President, members of the board, I want my special guest to be Mr. Larry Arnowitz, a treasured member of the Rules Committee, and I'm so glad to see his beautiful, handsome face back here today. Welcome back, Alderman Arnowitz.
Any further? Alderman from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. I'd like to have as my special guest my committee woman, Gwendolyn Evans. And my very special guest is Alderman Bosley.
Alderman from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just want to make sure we shout out to our folks up here in the balcony, and especially Mr. Demetrius Alfred from the International Firefighters Union.
Any further introductions? Any further inductions? Alderman from the 10th like to wrap us up.
Thank you, Mr. President. Members of the board, as much as I like to joke around, this day is November 22nd, and on this day in 1963, one of the most dramatic things ever occurred that day. Even though I was only 4 years old, I can still remember because it's the first time I saw my grandfather actually watch a television. It was just a machine that he never wanted to look at before. But so if I could, Mr. President, I'd like to request a moment of silence as we remember the day that John F. Kennedy was assassinated. I appreciate that, sir.
Could everybody stand and join us in a moment of silence?
Thank you.
Approval of the minutes.
Approval of the minutes for November the 15th, 2019.
Alderman from 22nd.
Mr. President, members of the board, I move for approval of minutes dated November the 15th, 2019.
It's moved by the Alderman from the 22nd, seconded by the Alderman from the 10th. Hearing no objection, Madam Clerk. All those in favor? Opposed? Okay. Report of city officials.
Report of city officials can be found in A, B, and C of the agenda and has been placed in the aldermen's mailboxes. Dear members of the board, I have the pleasure to submit the following individuals for reappointment to the Cherokee-Lemp Special Business District. The reappointment of Mr. Mark Overton, whose term will expire December 31st, 2023. The reappointment of Mr. John Brower, whose term will expire on December 31st, 2023. I respectfully request your approval of the reappointments. Sincerely, Lyda Cruzen, Mayor.
Alderman from the 9th.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. I would like to move to approve the mayor's reappointments to the Cherokee-Lemp Special Business District.
It was moved by the Alderman from the 9th and seconded by, I believe, the Alderman from the 22nd. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Appointments approved.
I have the pleasure to submit the following individuals for a reappointment to the Civilian Oversight Board. The reappointment of Ms. Sierra Simrel, whose term will expire on December 31st, 2023. The reappointment of Mr. David Bell, who resides in the 26th Ward, whose term will expire December 31st, 2023. The reappointment of Mr. Bradley Ortega, who resides in the 16th Ward, whose term will expire on December 31st, 2023. The reappointment of Mr. Stephen Rovak, whose term will expire December 31st, 2023. I respectfully request your approvals of these appointments.
Alderman from the 23rd.
I would like to move that to the Public Safety Committee.
Been moved.
Moved and seconded.
Okay, moved and seconded.
That it be moved to the Public
That it be moved to the Public Safety Committee. All those in favor, say aye. Aye.
Thank you.
Hearing no objections, that'll be assigned to the public. Do you have that, Tom? You got that?
Dear members of the board,
Go ahead, I'm sorry.
Dear members of the board, I have the pleasure to submit the following individual for appointment to the Tower Grove South Concerned Citizens Special District Board. The appointment of Ms. Carrie Kohler, a property owner who resides in the 15th Ward and whose term will expire on December 31st, 2021. I respectfully request your approval of the appointment. Sincerely, Lyda Cruz, Mayor.
Alderwoman from the 15th is
Thank you,
recognized.
Mr. President. Members of the board, I'd like to move to approve the mayor's appointment to the Tower Grove South Concerned Citizens Special District Board.
Second. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? Hearing no objections, the appointment will be approved.
That is the extent of report of city officials.
We'll dispense with line item number 7, line item 8, board bills for perfection, informal calendar. Is there anything on the informal calendar that someone would like to take off?
Mr. President, I would like to take Board Bill 120 off the informal calendar.
It's been moved to, you'd like to have that moved to the regular calendar, is that correct?
Yes, Mr. President.
Okay. We'll take that up. Dispense with line items number 9 and 10, first reading of board bills.
Board Bill 171, sponsored by Alderwoman Ingrassia, Alderman Muhammad, Alderwoman Middlebrook, Alderwoman Rice, Alderwoman Martin, Alderwoman Green, and Alderwoman Navarro. An ordinance prohibiting the City of St. Louis, the offices of the city's collector of revenue, treasurer, recorder of deeds, license collector, circuit attorney, and sheriff, and the city's board of election commissioners from asking applicants for employment about their salary history, including wages, benefits, and other compensation unless otherwise provided herein and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 172, sponsored by Alderman Boyd and Alderman Muhammad, an ordinance relating to the unlawful possession of a handgun by a minor to be added to the revised code of the City of St. Louis as Chapter 15.130. Board Bill 173, sponsored by Alderwoman Boyd, an ordinance approving a blighting study and redevelopment plan for the Goodfellow West Florissant scatter sites redevelopment area. That is the extent of first reading of board bills.
Reference to committee.
To the Legislation Committee, Board Bill 171. To Public Safety, Board Bill 172. To HUDs, Board Bill 173. That is the extent of reference to committee.
Second reading.
The following board bills were reported out of the HUDs Committee with a due pass recommendation. Board Bill 131, sponsored by Alderman Gunther, an ordinance recommended by the Planning Commission on October 8, 2019, to change the zoning of property as indicated on District Map and in City Block 761 from K Unrestricted District to J Industrial District at 423 Lynch Street, so as to include the described parcel of land in City Block 761 and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 133, sponsored by Alderman Narayan, an ordinance recommended by the Planning Commission on October 8, 2019, to change the zoning of property as indicated on District Map from A, Single Family Dwelling District to C, Multiple Family Dwelling District in City Block 4625.04, so as to include the described parcel of land in City Block 4625.04 and containing an emergency clause. Board Bill 155, sponsored by Alderman Gunther, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment authorizing the City of St. Louis, Missouri to issue its taxable industrial development revenue bonds in one or more series in a principal amount of not to exceed $100 million for the purpose of providing funds to pay the cost of acquiring, constructing, improving, and equipping an industrial development project in the city, approving a plan for such project, authorizing and directing the mayor and the comptroller to execute certain documents related thereto, and authorizing and directing the taking of other actions and approval of execution of other documents as are necessary or desirable to carry out and comply with the intent hereof. Board Bill 157, sponsored by Alderwoman Hubbard, an ordinance authorizing the execution of the redevelopment agreement between the City of St. Louis, Missouri and 900 North Tucker Building, LLC, prescribing the form and details of said agreement, authorizing other related actions in connection with such agreement, and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 158, sponsored by Alderwoman Hubbard, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing and directing the issuance and delivery of not to exceed $11,850,000 plus issuance costs, principal amount of tax increment revenue notes, Series 20AB of the City of St. Louis, Missouri, prescribing the form and details of such notes and the covenants and agreements made by the city to facilitate and protect the payment thereof, prescribing other matters relating thereto, and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 159, sponsored by Alderwoman Hubbard, an ordinance designating a portion of the City of St. Louis, Missouri as a redevelopment area known as the 900 North Tucker Boulevard Redevelopment Area pursuant to the Real Property Tax Increment Allocation Redevelopment Act, adopting and approving a redevelopment plan, adopting and approving a redevelopment project with respect hereto, adopting tax increment finances within the redevelopment area, making findings with respect thereto, establishing the 900 North Tucker Boulevard Allocations Fund, authorizing certain actions by city officials, and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 160, sponsored by Alderman Rhodey, an ordinance amending Ordinance 70599, approving and authorizing the execution of redevelopment agreements between the City of St. Louis, Missouri and Vertical Realty Advisors, LLC, authorizing other related actions in connection with such agreement, and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 168, sponsored by Alderwoman Navarro, an ordinance designating a portion of the City of St. Louis, Missouri as a redevelopment area known as the Forest Park Transit-Oriented Redevelopment Area pursuant to Real Property Tax Increment Allocations Redevelopment Act, adopting and approving a redevelopment plan, adopting and approving a redevelopment project with respect hereto, adopting tax increment financing within the redevelopment area, making findings with respect hereto, establishing the Forest Park Transit-Oriented Development Special Allocations Fund, authorizing certain actions by the city officials, and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 169, sponsored by Alderwoman Navarro, an ordinance authorizing the execution of a redevelopment agreement between the City of St. Louis, Missouri and Pearl Capital Management, LLC, prescribing the form and details of said agreement, authorizing other related actions in connection with such agreement, and containing a severability clause. Board Bill 170, sponsored by Alderwoman Navarro, an ordinance recommended by the Board of Estimate and Apportionment, authorizing and directing the issuance and delivery of not to exceed $14,100,000 plus issuance cost, principal amount of tax increment revenue notes, Series 20AB of the City of St. Louis, Missouri, prescribing the form and details of such notes and the covenants and agreements made by the city to facilitate and protect the payment thereof, prescribing other matters relating thereto, and containing a severability clause. The following bill was reported out of Ways and Means with a due pass recommendation. Board Bill 151, Committee Sub, sponsored by Alderman Moore, an ordinance authorizing Amendment Number 4 to the amended and restated lease between the City of St. Louis and EPV2 Dignity House, LLC, originally authorized by Ordinance 64565, which was adopted by the Board of Aldermen of the City of St. Louis and approved September 28, 1998, and subsequently amended pursuant to Ordinance 64913, 68941 for property and improvements commonly known as Homer G. Phillips Dignity House located at Whittier and Kennerly Streets, and containing an emergency clause and containing a severability clause. That is the extent of second readings.
Dispense with line item number 14, line item 15, perfection consent calendar.
Board Bill 134, sponsored by Alderwoman Spencer and Alderman Todd, an ordinance directing the installation of signs as specified in this ordinance, notifying individuals that the City of St. Louis parks and parks facilities or child care facilities under Section 210.201 of the revised statutes of Missouri, and that as child care facilities, the possession of carrying firearms are prohibited under Section 571.170 of the revised statutes of Missouri. Board Bill 140, committee sub-sponsored by Alderwoman Ingrassia, Alderman Kotar, Alderwoman Boyd, Alderwoman Howard, Alderwoman Green, and Alderman Todd, an ordinance amending Ordinance 67799, Section 2, to be codified as subsection 10.04.285E of the Revised Code of the City of St. Louis, regulating the conditions of the animals kept outdoors, amending Ordinance 66595, Section 6, to be codified as subsection 10.04.220EJ16J of the Revised Code of the City of St. Louis regarding the establishment and use of dog parks, allowing for waivers of certain requirements, repealing Section 10.04.010 of Ordinance 67799, and enacting in lieu thereof a new Section 10.04.010 to be codified in the Revised Code of the City of St. Louis pertaining to definitions, enacting a new code, Section 10.12.0670 of the Revised Code of the City of St. Louis prohibiting the clawing of cats, amending Ordinance 70889, Section 32B1, adjusting the requirements for a dangerous dog posted notice. Board Bill 36, sponsored by Alderwoman Navarro, an ordinance authorizing the mayor and comptroller to execute upon receipt of and in consideration of the sum of $1,000 and other good and valuable consideration a quitclaim deed to Remise Release and Forever Quitclaim unto 6005 Westminster LLC, certain city-owned property located in City Block 5423, which property is known by the address of 6001 through 5 Westminster Place. Board Bill 150, sponsored by Alderwoman Ingrassia, an ordinance approving the petition of an owner of certain real property to establish a community improvement district, establishing the Shoto Avenue Corridor Community Improvement District, finding a public purpose for the establishment of the Shoto Avenue Corridor Community Improvement District, and containing a emergency clause and containing a severability clause. That is the extent of perfection consent calendar.
Alderman from the 22nd is recognized.
Adoption of the perfection consent calendar.
It was moved by the Alderman from the 22nd and seconded by the Alderwoman from the 19th. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? By your vote, the perfection consent calendar has been adopted. Board bills for perfection.
Board Bill 152, sponsored by Alderwoman Ingrassia, Alderman Gunther, Alderman Kotar, Alderman Cone, Alderwoman Middlebrook, Alderwoman Green, Alderwoman Rice, Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Todd, Alderwoman Murphy, and Alderwoman Tyus. An ordinance prohibiting medical and mental health care providers from providing conversion therapy, known as reparative therapy, escape therapy, or sexual orientation and gender identity change efforts to a minor, regardless of whether the provider receives compensation in exchange for such services, and providing penalties for the violation of said prohibition, and authorizing the director of the health department to receive, investigate, and refer the city 6 BB counselor for prosecution to municipal court complaints of alleged violations of the provisions of this ordinance and containing an emergency clause.
Alderwoman from the 6th is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to move to place Board Bill 152 on the informal calendar.
At the request of the Alderwoman from the 6th, Board Bill number 152 will be placed on the informal calendar. We now go back. Board Bill 120, I believe.
Board Bill 120 as amended, sponsored by Alderman Muhammad, Alderwoman Davis, Alderman Vaccaro, Alderwoman Ingrassia, and Alderwoman Clark Hubbard. An ordinance prohibiting employers in the City of St. Louis and employers outside of the City of St. Louis, which the city has contracted with or engaged for the provision of services, from basing job, hiring, or promotion decisions on an applicant's criminal history unless the employer can demonstrate its relevance to the employment-related decision, or where employers are required to exclude applicants with certain criminal convictions due to local, state, or federal law, or regulations and prohibiting employers from inquiring about a job applicant's criminal history until after it has been determined that the job applicant is otherwise qualified for the job position or the job applicant is a part of the final pool of candidates from which the job position will be filled and all the applicants in the pool are asked.
Alderman from the 21st is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move for the perfection of Board Bill 120.
It was moved by the Alderman from the 21st, seconded by the Alderwoman from the 6th. Alderman from the 21st, proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like to introduce floor substitute for Board Bill 120.
It's been moved to introduce a floor substitute. Is there a second? It's been moved and seconded by the Alderwoman from the 13th. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Proceed, Alderman.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, Board Bill 120 is about giving people a second chance in expanding employment and economic opportunities in the city of St. Louis. This is nothing new to our city. Under the Slay administration, Mayor Slay banned the box for all city job applications for certain departments, and it had a great impact and effect on our city because we were able to recruit and attract more people to work for the city in various departments. What Board Bill 120 does is it expands on that, and it requires every employer in the city of St. Louis to ban a box, removing that question from the initial job application. This would not impact companies or employers with a special service, and it would not require an employer not to run a criminal background check on a particular applicant. This only gets the applicant through the initial job application process, thus making it a step closer for them to achieve or secure economic employment. I'm introducing this for a substitute because I heard the concerns of my colleague last week, and I reformed the bill and made it a little bit more inclusive, and we split responsibilities between two city departments. The Department of, the agency of CREA, the Civil Rights Enforcement Agency, will be responsible for receiving these complaints and investigating these complaints. And the License Collector's Office, with the recommendation of CREA and a recommendation of the Board of Aldermen Legislation Committee, would recommend that the license collector impose penalties that's included within this board bill and hopefully within this ordinance that would force an employer or a business to comply with this particular policy. It's numerous penalties that's imposed in it. The policies and procedure of this board bill will be passed by legislation committee and adopted by CREA and a license collector office jointly and collectively. This law has been passed around in other cities and counties numerous times in various parts of the country, and I think that it's only right that we do the same thing here in the city of St. Louis. Our colleagues in the county have already started. They were a little bit late, but they have actually banned the box for any employee that does contractual agreements with St. Louis County. And this is exactly what this does here in St. Louis City. So I would ask for my colleagues' approval of and passage of Board Bill 120, floor substitute.
Any discussion? Alderwoman from the 1st is recognized.
Mr. President, members of the board, if the Alderman from the 21st would yield, please.
I will.
Proceed.
So I got your floor substitute here. Normally when there are changes, there's something highlighted or underlined. But it's not on this, so I would request that from now on it is. I'm supportive of the bill, but I wanted to hear again, so you changed before it was going to be another department that it was going to be reporting to?
Yes, Alderwoman. In the initial board bill, it was giving entirely to the license collector's office to do investigation, receipt of complaints, and move it from there. With the floor substitute, we are giving the responsibility of investigation and the complaint receiving to CREA. and CREA would make the recommendation to send it to the license collector's office for further action.
Okay. And so this is just something, I don't know if it's a question, it's something I just want to put out there. I like this. I do believe people get a second chance, but I think that now with the advent of CaseNet and everything else, that any employer that really wants to find out if you have a criminal background, they're going to do it anyway, okay? They won't be able to use that against you. What makes this good is that they've often asked people, and if people left it blank or they didn't fill it out truthfully, then they would go back and use that to fire people and say you didn't fill it out truthfully. So that takes that away. But any employer that really wants to look up your background now, with CaseNet and things like that, they will be able to, but they will not be able to fire you if you don't tell them, or if you didn't, if you weren't truthful about your criminal background. Everybody makes mistakes. You don't want it to follow you around forever. One of the reasons we have juvenile laws, and people forget that, is because juvenile brains do not fully come to terms until the 25s and 30s. So people who want to hold juveniles to the same standard that you do adult, that is just wrong. That's why our courts are separated like that. So this is a good piece of legislation, but with the advent of technology, I think it's going to take away some of the things that we would like to see. But the part that I really like is that it will prevent anybody from getting fired who does not tell their employer that they had something previously in their background. So thank you for introducing the board bill.
Thank you, Alderwoman.
I have no further questions.
Thank you.
Alderman from the 24th.
Thank you. Will the Alderman from the 21st yield for questioning?
Yes.
Thank you. First I wanted to just thank you for taking some of the concerns from, I guess, last week into account and putting them into a floor substitute. I am overall very supportive of ban the box legislation. I think it's incredibly important that we get it 100% right, because there are some serious big business interests that will be looking certainly to strike down legislation like this. So I think it's important that we get it right. So under this floor substitute, I am not seeing where a employer accused of violating this legislation would have an opportunity to have a hearing on the matter. Could you direct me to where that language may be?
Absolutely. Thank you, Alderman, for that question. Section 2. Section 2, go to line sentence 12 and 13. The Board of Aldermen Legislative Committee may conduct investigative hearings concerning violations of this ordinance and oversee its implementation and enforcement.
So this would be this would be prior to that person or that company's day in court, or this would be instead of their day in court?
It can be, but if you read the entire legislation in its totality, there's also a section, and I can find it for you in one moment, but the license collector's office and CREA would create a policy in a formal procedure that they will report to the legislation committee for our formal approval regarding the implementation of this particular ordinance. So that hasn't been done yet because we haven't passed this ordinance, but they are required to create a formal procedure, and it requires the approval of the legislation committee.
Thank you. And then does this legislation, I haven't seen anywhere in this where a condition of any licensure is predicated on not on complying with this. I guess ultimately, where does the license collector then get the authority to revoke an existing business license?
Section 3 and penalties. Section 3 and penalties, and it goes for the second violation, employers shall receive an order issued by the office of the license collector requiring that they can come into compliance with the provision, and if they don't, then a civil penalty can be deemed necessary or determined by the office of the license collector. And for the third violation, or if it continues, the license collector can have the authority to potentially revoke their business license.
And then, I guess finally, just some concern, and this is just a super nuts and bolts thing. If we look at page 5, line 11, that I think goes to the heart of what we're discussing right now, that the Office of the License Collector shall adopt rules and policy procedures for imposing the penalties and shall present the rules and policies to the Legislation Committee of the Board of Aldermen. Does the Legislation Committee need to approve those rules, or is the license collector simply saying, I've created these policies, here's what they are?
Well, no. So, good question, Alderman. But again, in the previous language before page 5, it says that the Legislation Committee will oversee its implementation, which means they would need the approval of the committee with any formal process that they adopt as it relates to the implementation of this policy. So yes, they would need legislative consent for any policy that's derived from this ordinance.
And then I guess finally, just I guess your opinion on it. Do you believe that if we look at page 4, line 1, which is paragraph 6 of section 1, that employers can't seek to obtain publicly available information, to echo the concerns of my colleague from the first, does that mean, in your opinion, that should you Google an applicant and or put them through CaseNet, that would be prohibited under this? Because it's just very hard to police kind of what people are doing in their own.
So expound on your question a little bit more for me.
Sure.
I don't understand it ideally.
So, I know that for a lot of employers and a lot of, just people in general, whether they're hiring a babysitter or hiring or hiring a CEO for a Fortune 500 company, everywhere in between, that they're going to end up Googling the person to get, information on them. And oftentimes they'll be using our Missouri CaseNet system to see, just kind of what they may have outstanding even. And so that would certainly be, in my opinion, seeking to obtain publicly available information. So I guess I'm kind of caught in a conundrum where if it's publicly available, how could you say don't seek something that's publicly available?
Well, I think so. Your biggest concern is if a person is applying for a specific job that they have a criminal history and it could impact their responsibilities. Well, in that same section in paragraph 1, unless the employer can demonstrate that the employment-related decision is based on all information available, including the frequency, recentness, and severity of the criminal history, and the history is reasonably related to or bears upon the duties and responsibilities of the job position. So that wouldn't comply with this exactly. So if a person is applying for a job, as you said, a babysitter, or someone applying to be a CEO of a company, so if their criminal history is directly related to the job or it impacts the duties that they must carry out, then it doesn't matter because of that particular section that's already listed.
And then one more question, and I apologize. I did say that the last one was my last question.
Yes, you did.
The fines that would end up collected as a result of any violations of this, where do those fines go to? Do they go to general revenue? Does the license collector's office keep them? Is a new fund created? If we're imposing civil penalties, what happens with the money that is generated from violations of this legislation?
Well, Well, first we got to define what civil penalties are. And again, those policies and procedures have not been conferred upon by the legislation committee until this board bill passes. So we won't know until we actually meet, or whenever the chairwoman of that committee actually calls a committee hearing and discuss the implementation and enforcement of this particular legislation.
Do you have anywhere that you prefer in your mind? Would you rather the penalty or any funds derived from violations of this legislation? Do you believe they should stay in the license collector's office? Should they come to general revenue? Is there some sort of additional fund that should be created for any number of things that would maybe be related to this legislation? Because if we're going to be looking at, and I believe our authority is to fine up to $500 per violation, is what council had told me previously. This is something that when we enact, we could see hundreds and hundreds of violations pretty quickly. So I would like to, as we move forward with this, I'd like, of course, the legislation to have teeth, but if we're going to be pulling any substantial amount of money into the city, I think it's always important to just keep tabs on where that money goes to. But if the license collector is keeping that, I don't have a dog in the fight. I'm just trying to figure out where you're proposing that money go to.
I will leave that open to the legislation committee. Again, the policy and implementation and enforcement of this ordinance has not been established, and that's left up to the committee along with CREA and the license collector's office.
Thank you. I have nothing further.
Is there further comment? Alderman from the 28th.
Thank you. I would also like to ask if the Alderman from the 21st would yield.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. First, I just want to say I support Ban the Box, and I'm very grateful for your work on this. I do have a question about the enforcement piece here. In Section 2, the Board of Aldermen Legislative Committee may conduct investigative hearings concerning violations and oversee its implementation and enforcement. And I say this as someone who used to, or I ask this as someone who used to sit on that committee. I said, what qualifications do you see that the legislation committee has in order to actually carry out and conduct these investigations? Because there's going to be private employers and private employees who are going to be dependent on, who are going to be impacted by the decisions of that body.
Right, and again, a formal procedure and policy process would be established. So CREA would make that ultimate decision if a violation of said penalty should be transferred or sent to the legislation committee for further review. And that clause in particular was taken from, it was modeled after the state of Colorado, and they did it statewide. And they had a particular committee, and it was a committee on human rights, that would investigate violations of that particular state law. So it was modeled after Columbia. And after doing further research, various other cities did the exact same thing, whether they set up special commissions or special boards composed of residents, business owners, and stakeholders to do it. Here with this particular board bill, I just gave that particular responsibility or authority to the legislation committee.
So in the example in Colorado, was that committee made up of elected members of a legislative body?
Yes.
Because it seems to me that this would be a violation of separation of powers. We're enacting the law, and then we're also putting ourselves in charge. I mean, I understand what you're saying, that CREA may come up with another process, but the legislation here says, I mean, it says may, but it's saying that the legislative body would have the authority to investigate and enforce, which is not our duty. Our duty is to legislate, and then there's another branch of government that does the enforcement.
Well, it doesn't say enforce. It says we may conduct investigative hearings. It doesn't say that we can enforce, or make CREA or the license collector, impose these penalties or impose business owners of said violation. It only says that we have the ability to investigate.
So they would be, I just am not clear, I guess, what exactly the duties would be of that committee then under this. Do you see them bringing in the employer and the employee and asking questions and issuing a report? What would be the work there? Because I just want to, again, I want to make sure that this is as tight and enforceable as possible, and this raises a red flag for me. And the rest of this, you know, again, I'm very supportive of this. I just want to make sure that we know how this is going to work and that it is compliant with good governance.
Absolutely. Well, it's not exactly about investigating complaints or investigating personal disputes between an employer and an employee. It's about investigating whether that business is in compliance with this particular ordinance. Again, we can't enforce anything, not that particular committee. Of course, the ordinance can, but not the committee. Is just saying that we have the ability to investigate should investigation be necessary or called for.
And how do you see those requests for an investigation coming to the committee? Would it be an employee who brings this to the committee and says,
No.
I think this employer is in violation, or the committee members would become aware?
CREA, the
So
Civil
CREA
Rights
would bring
Enforcement
something to the legislation
Agency.
committee.
Right.
Okay, I think it would be helpful if that were a little bit more defined. Because under this it says that committee could be conducting the investigative hearings and overseeing implementation and enforcement. But I appreciate your responses to those questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman.
Alderman from the 25th is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Will the Alderman from the 21st Ward please yield for questions?
Yes.
Okay. So I also am, very supportive of this. I was supportive when the previous administration had rolled this out for city employees and applicants for city jobs. I always get a little leery when we're dealing with floor substitutes for matters of such a significance to employers in the city of St. Louis. When this was first introduced, there was no effective date in here. That's been addressed, so I appreciate that. There's further definitions in terms of what would constitute, an employer's responsibility in terms of whether or not we have situations where there's employers that have, let's say, a property management firm. They're, having employees who are going into people's homes and doing service work, but there's not really, I get concerned because when the section 1 that defines that, it doesn't really have a process associated with how employers should be screening. So it just says that at the end of the basically interview process, when it gets to the selection period, that an employer then has the opportunity to conduct a background check on these individuals. I guess, have you had any conversations with, the Regional Business Council, any of the associations that represent businesses in our community about how this might affect them and what they would need to do?
No, Alderman, I have not. I have talked with small business owners within my community and in other communities in North St. Louis. Have I had a deliberative conversation with the Regional Business Council or someone representing a professional business organization? No.
So I'm not sure if you're familiar with some of my own professional background, but I've worked in human resources for a greater part of my adult life here. There are a lot of processes and systems and policies that are in place with various employers, large and small, throughout our entire region. I do have concerns that these are things that need to be more defined before we start rolling this out. I know the Alderwoman from the 6th says that we can pass this and amend it later, but these are expectations that we're setting for employers in our region. Didn't? No? Okay. So my apologies to the Alderwoman from the 6th. So I would rather have a bill that's more perfect before, finalizing this and passing it out. I did share some of my concerns with the president after this was passed out of committee, and it seems as though some of those, considerations were put into the floor sub, so I very much appreciate that. The implementation and enforcement is also a concern of mine, which I know the Alderwoman from the 28th and the Alderwoman from the, I think, 8th were having conversations about in terms of the enforcement piece of this, and also the role of the committee in terms of conducting investigative hearings concerning violations. That is what it says in this board bill. I know that in your responses to the Alderwoman from the 28th, you said that that wasn't going to be the intent of the committee, but it's underneath section 2, which is implementation and enforcement, and line 12 says the Board of Aldermen Legislative Committee may conduct investigative hearings concerning violations of this ordinance and oversee its implementation and enforcement. So that would lead me to believe that the legislation committee is going to be overseeing any type of violations that come, forth as a result of this legislation. So I would really like to see either some amendments to this floor substitute, or have this go back to committee for further discussion. But I very much appreciate your efforts. And certainly I think we've made some progress since this has passed out of committee in terms of the floor sub. So I really very much thank you for those.
Thank you, Alderman.
No further discussion. The Alderman from the 21st is recognized to close. Alderman from the 21st is recognized to close.
I'm sorry. Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues. I hear your concerns loud and clear. And as you can see, we drastically changed the bill from the first version in its initial introduction. I have no problems with continuing to work with the Aldermen and my colleagues to perfect this legislation. So, Mr. President, I would like to place Board Bill 120, floor substitute, on the informal calendar.
Hearing so, we'll place Board Bill 120 on the informal calendar. We'll dispense with line items 17, 18, and 19. Line item number 20, courtesy resolutions, consent calendar. Oh, that was passed? My apologies. We'll dispense with line item 21, 22, and 23 will be dispensed with. Line item number 24, announcements.
Tuesday, November 26th, Streets will have a committee hearing 9 a.m. in the Kennedy Room. The Board of Aldermen will be closed Thursday, November 28th, and Friday, November 29th for the Thanksgiving holiday. That is the extent of the announcements.
Any other announcements? Alderwoman from the 1st.
Mr. President, members of the board, I'd like to wish the Alderman from the 18th, Jesse Todd, a happy birthday. I think he had a birthday yesterday. Thank you.
Alderman from the 22nd.
Yes, Mr. President, members of the board, I'd like to announce that there will be a town hall meeting tomorrow from 1 to 3 at the Best Place, 5736 Dr. Martin Luther King Drive. It's sponsored by Senator Carla May and the Missouri Democratic Party. So candidates will be out, and it's just a chance for people to come out and hear what people have to say. Thank you.
Alderman from the 24th.
Thank you. I think it's important that we pause for a second and realize that we may not see each other again before Thanksgiving. So first of all, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. But secondly, I think it's important to note that the Wednesday before Thanksgiving is traditionally one of the biggest rings at the register for our bars here in town. And it kind of creates a perfect storm because it's also one of the biggest travel days. So I think it might be of use to just remind your constituency that just because it's the holidays and everyone's getting together and having a good time doesn't mean that they should be driving cars afterwards. I would encourage everyone to drive safe, get where they need to go, and if they're having a bit too much fun, just remember to call a ride, call a designated driver, whatever, so that everyone can also have a good Christmas season. Thank you.
Alderwoman from the 5th.
Thank you, Mr. President, I guess. I don't know what to call you right now. But I just wanted to announce that the Demetrius Johnson Foundation could use some volunteers tonight to help put together baskets and stuff for the event that they've been doing for the last, I guess, 10 years, I know, where they disperse turkeys throughout the entire city. They have definitely always assisted me in the 5th Ward, and they will drop like over 100 turkeys in my ward to my senior buildings, and I know that they could use some extra hands tonight if anybody wants to help. And tomorrow morning at 8 a.m., we'll be at the Demetrius Johnson Foundation, and big shouts out to our city streets department because they pull out those big vehicles and they help us disperse turkeys throughout the entire city. So if anybody would like to help out or be a part, please do. Thank you.
Alderwoman from the 8th.
Thank you, Mr. President. Also, as traditionally the day after Thanksgiving is Black Friday and all the sales are up, please remember Small Business Saturday, the Saturday after Thanksgiving. All of our local business districts, this is bread and butter for them. It's the day that pulls them sometimes out of the red and back into the black. And so particularly in the 8th Ward, we've got South Grand, and then the Shaw Neighborhood Association is doing a Small Business Saturday event, and there will be refreshments at different businesses around the Shaw neighborhood. We have a new wine and cheese shop that is just open as of today on 39th Street next to Sweetheart. And so please just remember to get out and support our local businesses.
Alderman from the 25th. I'm sorry, I'm stumbling up here. Proceed.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll respond to either. So I would also, just as the chair of the Parks and Environmental Matters Committee, also like to remind folks as we enter into the holiday season to please be mindful of single-use plastics. We have a lot of friends, family that are coming over to enjoy our bounty and our graciousness and hopefully some really delicious food. But please remember that these plastic forks, plastic spoons, plastic plates, plastic bags will all end up somewhere. They don't really biodegrade, right? And so they'll end up in our rivers, they'll end up in our landfills, all for one single time of enjoying someone's hopefully very delicious food. I was at an environmental conference for Anheuser-Busch InBev. They had all of their global suppliers in, and it dawned on me, and I reminded them that the plastic fork that my grandparents used at their Thanksgiving dinner table in 1959 is still around, and neither one of them are. So, please remember that one bite of food, is probably not worth damaging the planet over. So please be kind, either reuse, recycle, and try and avoid single-use plastics where possible. Thank you.
Alderwoman from the 20th.
Members of the board, I'd like to announce that and welcome all of my colleagues to the 7th Annual Cherokee Street Community Thanksgiving on Tuesday of next week. This will be the 7th year in a row. We invite you all to enjoy turkeys, potatoes, and lots of beverages. On 2720 from 6 p.m. to 10 p.m. on Tuesday night, we will be preparing 200 pounds of potatoes at my house the night before. If you're into eggnog and snipping off the tops of your fingers, come on by. Also, in the spirit of spending money and shopping for holidays gifts, Friday, November 29th, we have Black-Owned Black Friday, featuring 30-plus Black-owned businesses and makers on Cherokee Street, starting at Mesa Home from noon to 5 on Friday following Thanksgiving. So spend your money locally and spend your money wisely. One correction there, I joined my colleague from the 9th Ward in inviting you to all these wonderful things.
Alderwoman from the 6th.
Thank you, Mr. President. If you have the time, please hit up Roosevelt High School football team's Twitter page at @1 Rough Riders, or their Facebook page. They won their district championship game last Saturday, and we are headed to Kennett, Missouri for their state quarterfinal tomorrow. As most of you know, they've had a really bittersweet year because their beloved coach was terminated quite unfairly from the school, and so they really deserve some congratulatory and supportive messages as we head to the state quarterfinal. Thank you.
Alderman from the 12th.
Thank you, Mr. President, members of the board. I'm hungry after listening to all this. Just two quick things. I just wanted to take a minute to recognize Noel Gonzalez, whose last day is today in the mayor's office. And I don't know if someone else mentioned that, but I'd like to thank him. He's been very helpful to me and has listened to me yell a few times. But no, I appreciate everything you've done. Secondly, I just want to again thank everybody for everything he's did.
Alderman from the 4th.
Thank you, Mr. President and members of the board. Tomorrow at 10 a.m. at the Salvation Army is the 4th Ward community meeting, ward meeting tomorrow at 10 o'clock at the Salvation Army. And on Monday at 4 o'clock at the Holman G. Phillips and all my senior living facilities, we're giving out over 700 turkeys. I hope Demetrius can give me 100 of them. Thank you.
Alderman from the 26th.
President and members of the board, I want to bid Noah Gonzalez well. Thank you for always taking my call and answering my questions and helping me with whatever I needed. So I wish you all the best. I want to give a shout out to Alderman Rhodey. Last night we spent the night together. No, we didn't. No, we didn't. We both participated in the Covenant House sleep out last night, and it was an amazing, humbling experience. And it was great to share that experience, a freshman alderman with a senior alderman. And my biggest takeaway was that just don't take for granted what other people are praying for. So. Looking forward to looking at Thanksgiving and a lot of other things different this week after that experience. So thank you, Covenant House, for the invitation. And also echoing my sister's plea for people to come out tonight to Demetrius Johnson Center at 6 o'clock. We're going to be stuffing the baskets, and then again tomorrow morning they're going to be distributing the baskets. It's something like you've never seen, the way he has his assembly line set up for doing the baskets. So thank you again, you all. Everybody have a blessed Thanksgiving. It's at Demetrius Johnson Foundation, 724 North Union. The Demetrius Johnson Charter Foundation Center is at 724 North Union in the 26th Ward. No. So hope to see you tonight and in the morning. Thank you.
Thank you, Alderwoman, for the kind shout out. I would be remiss if I didn't remark, at least acknowledge that she actually spent the night. I did more of a cameo appearance, but it is for those who haven't had the opportunity, Covenant House is a remarkable program, and going there really brings home how fortunate so many of us are who have families and who have not gone through homelessness as a teenager. It's a remarkable program. It was great seeing you there last night, Alderwoman. Alderman from the 22nd.
Yes, Mr. President, I have two more additional announcements I forgot to mention. I just want to send a big shout out and happy belated birthday to one of our stellar up-and-coming aldermen, freshman alderwoman, Miss Shameen Hubbard, who celebrated a birthday this week. So happy belated birthday. Also, a very up-and-coming entrepreneur, Miss Kayla Boyd is celebrating her 20th birthday next week, November the 27th. And if you're looking to do Christmas shopping for some young ladies that like lip gloss, you can visit her website at kaylabbeauty.com and kaylab.beauty on Instagram. She had a shout out from Shade Room, which is kind of exciting. We were all just beside ourselves. That's a real popular Instagram program or whatever it is. They talk about celebrity gossip, all this stuff. But she's really doing phenomenal work at Jackson State. We're just so proud of her. So shout out to my baby girl for her 20th birthday, November 27th.
When are we going to have Boyd Steaks and Boyd Resorts and?
Oh, soon to be coming. Stay tuned.
Okay. Any other announcements? Hearing none, we will proceed to excused aldermen. Alderman from the 22nd.
Mr. President, members of the board, I move to excuse the alderman from the 11th and 14th due to necessary absence.
All those in favor? Been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? No! The ayes have it.
Where's the next?
Alderman from the 22nd is recognized for the adjournment motion.
Mr. President, members of the board, I move to adjourn until December the 6th.
Been seconded by the alderman from the 25th. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed? We're adjourned.